And now, a passage from the History of the Bonin Islands from the year 1827 to the year 1876, Chapter 2, Nathaniel Savory and the First Colonists. At Bradford, near Salem, in the state of Massachusetts, at the close of the 18th century, lived a family of the name of Savory. The father was the owner of a little property, working hard and bringing up his children to work, a typical New Englander of those days, an independent man pushing his own interests, among other independent men doing the same, not averse from his glass of punch and fond of having a neighbor in to share it with him and to discuss the affairs of the community. No doubt, too, he fulfilled the duties of religion and duly supported his chapel, but probably his wife fulfilled them with the sincerer piety. And he was quite content that it should be so. They had 7 children, 5 sons, Robert, John, Eleazar, Nathaniel, and Benjamin, and 2 daughters, Judith and Mercy. They held well together, married and settled down, all with one exception, within an easy radius of one another. Judith became Mrs. Stickney, Mercy, Mrs. Thurlow. Eleazar was the last to take to himself a wife, and in his days of prudent waiting was laughed at by his brothers as a stiff old bachelor. When he did marry, he married money, and that, as an impertinent nephew Wickham, the son of his brother John, said, was the secret of it. But Wickham's own father, as Wickham himself testifies, never lost a chance of turning a dollar, and was the one amongst the brothers who raised himself highest in the world. The adventurer of the family was Nathaniel, and it is Nathaniel who becomes the prominent figure in our history. He was born July 31st, 1794, and in 1814, when he was 20 years of age, went away to sea. He does not seem to have had any quarrel with his family, and perhaps for a time he communicated irregularly with them. He was certainly at the port of Philadelphia in September 1817, for amongst his extant letters and papers is a certificate of citizenship dated at that port on the 15th of that month, but a reference to his having been at Salem, found in letter 16 of the home correspondence, though on that occasion he never went home to see his father, seems to put it beyond question that he never revisited his home. And eventually his family ceased to hear any news of him, and almost gave up hopes that he was still in the land of the living. The certificate is as follows. Copy number 25234, District and Port of Philadelphia. I, John Steele, Collector of the District of Philadelphia, do hereby certify that Nathaniel Savory, an American seaman aged 23 years or thereabouts, of the height of 5 feet 6 inches, dark complexion, black hair, gray eyes, has a small scar on the upper lip, a natural reddish mark on his right wrist, is a native of Essex County and the state of Massachusetts, has this day produced to me proof, in the manner directed in the Act, entitled An Act for the Relief and Protection of American Seamen, and pursuant to the said Act, I do hereby certify that the said Nathaniel Savory is a citizen of the United States of America. In witness whereof I have hereunto set my hand and seal of office this 15th day of September, 1817. This Nathaniel Savory, an American citizen, but none the less under English auspices, was one of the founders of the first colony, of which he subsequently became chief on the Bonin Islands. It came about in this way. Nathaniel Savory was serving in some capacity on an English merchantman, which in the year 1829 put in at Honolulu. What the occasion may have been, I do not know, but in firing a salute he had the misfortune to lose a finger of his right hand. Having to undergo surgical treatment, his vessel left him behind at the port of Oahu. Now, the fame of the Bonin Islands had reached Hawaii, or the Sandwich Islands, as they were then called, and there were already 1 or 2 of the chance residents in Oahu who were entertaining the idea of going to these newly discovered islands and trying their fortune there as colonists. Savory, on his recovery, threw himself warmly into the project. He had many acquaintances among the storekeepers in Honolulu, and many friends among the captains of whalers and small trading vessels to the South Seas. From all accounts, the islands were fruitful. Fish and turtle abounded. The climate was warm and genial, and the prospects of opening out some lucrative trade seemed altogether promising. Plans took shape, the scheme being furthered in every way by Mr. Richard Charlton, at that time British consul in Honolulu, and a schooner was fitted out which eventually set sail with Nathaniel and 4 other white men on board in the month of May 1830, and having safely traversed the intervening 3,300 miles of open sea, arrived at its destination on June 26, 1830. Nathaniel's 4 associates, leaving out of account some 25 Hawaiian natives with some women, were Alden Chapin, who also hailed from Massachusetts, John Millanchamp, Charles Johnson, a Dane, and the 4th, Mateo Mazzaro, who was the head of the party and reported to have been a native of Genoa. Now, of these 5, the only one whose claim to be a British subject has never been questioned, though he may not have been an Englishman, was John Millanchamp. But I think we must admit the claim of Mateo Mazzaro, and call him Matthew, to have been a British subject too, for he it was who with Millanchamp seems in the first instance to have approached the British consul, and under him to have taken the direction of all the arrangements of the expedition. In the year 1842, the affairs of the island brought him again to Honolulu, and we have an interesting report dated December 27 of that year written by the then British consul Mr. Alexander Simpson, in which he makes special reference to Mazzaro's visit and gives us some valuable information about the islands. This small but interesting and, from its situation, valuable group of islands, so the report runs, lies in latitude 27 degrees north, longitude 146 degrees east, within 500 miles distance from the city of Yedo in Japan. It appertains to Great Britain, having been discovered by an English whaling vessel in 1825, and formerly taken possession of by Captain Beechey of HMS Blossom in 1827. There were no aboriginal inhabitants found on the islands, nor any trace that such had existed. Their aggregate extent does not exceed 250 square miles, but their geographical position so near Japan, that mysterious empire, of which the trade will one day be of immense value, gives them a peculiar importance and interest. The climate is excellent, the soil rich and productive, and there is an admirable harbor well fitted for the port of a commercial city. The first colonists of this eastern group were 2 men of the names of Millanchamp and Mazzaro, who, having expressed to Mr. Charlton, the British consul at the Sandwich Islands, their wish to settle on some uninhabited island in the Pacific Ocean, were by him recommended to go to this group, of the discovery and taking possession of which he had been recently informed. They sailed accordingly in 1830, took with them some Sandwich Island natives as laborers, some livestock and seeds, and landing at Port Lloyd, hoisted an English flag which had been given them by Mr. Charlton. The little settlement has been visited by several whaling vessels since that period, and also by a vessel from the British China Squadron. Mr. Millanchamp returned to England, and Mr. Mazzaro, anxious to get additional settlers or laborers to join the infant colony, the whole population of which only numbers about 20, came to the Sandwich Islands in the autumn of 1842 in an English whaling vessel. He described the little settlement as flourishing, stated that he had hogs and goats in abundance, and a few cattle, that he grew Indian corn and many vegetables, and had all kinds of tropical fruits, that in fact he could supply fresh provisions and vegetables to 40 vessels annually. Mr. Mazzaro, who, in virtue of his first arrival, receives the appellation of governor, finds the task of governing even this little colony no easy matter. He applied to me for assistance in this task, and thankfully received the following document, which I drew up for his assistance and moral support. I hereby certify that Mr. Matthew Mazzaro was one of the original leaders of the expedition fitted up from this port, under the protection of Richard Charlton, Esquire, Her Majesty's Consul, to colonize the Bonin Islands. And I would intimate to the masters of all whaling vessels touching at that group, that the said Mazzaro is a sober and discreet man, and recommend them to support him by all means in their power against the troublers of the peace of that distant settlement, recommending also to the settlers to receive Mr. Mazzaro as their head until some officer directly appointed by Her Britannic Majesty is placed over them. Alex Simpson, HBM, Acting Consul for the Sandwich Islands. It will be noted how in the above report Mr. Simpson lays stress on the fact that the islands appertain to Great Britain and makes no mention of Nathaniel Savory or of the two other original settlers who were not British subjects. This was hardly fair on Nathaniel, who, from the first, I believe, had thrown himself the most wholeheartedly into the enterprise. He certainly stuck manfully to the islands when he got there, leaving them only once on a trip to Manila, and died on his island, an old man, in his 80th year on April 10, 1874. We also notice in the report that Mr. Mazzaro finds the task of governing even this little colony no easy matter, and that Mr. Simpson calls on masters of whaling vessels putting in at the islands to support him by all means in their power against the troublers of the peace of that distant settlement. Troubles, it is certain, there were, and continued to be, rivalries, feuds, and even bloodshed, and against Mazzaro himself, in spite of the testimonial he receives from Mr. Simpson, there were some ugly charges, but away from his islands there was nothing to prevent his giving his own colored account of things to the British consul at Honolulu and presenting himself in a favorable light. Materially, however, the colony was prospering, and opportunities of sale and barter were furnished when, not unfrequently, whalers and other vessels came to visit it. Mazzaro died in 1848, 5 years after his return from Honolulu, leaving a widow who subsequently became the wife of Nathaniel Savory, and the unsalaried governorship of a British colony to be contested for between him and John Mellenchamp. If you enjoy my content and want to support the channel, please head on over to Patreon. Link is in the description below. Your support would be deeply appreciated and would really help the channel. Thank you.